Welcome to the webinar Introduction to Scripting and COM Automation in PTV Visum. My name is Arndt Vogel. I'm working with the product management team for PTV Visum, and I will guide you through this session. Please note that your microphones are muted during the webinar, so if you've got any questions, please use the chat function of the webinar software, and I will then try to answer your questions directly after the webinar presentation. This webinar is the first part of two successive webinars about scripting and COM. And in this first part, I will give an introduction to the scripting techniques available in PTV Visum. And I'll show, of course, some basic aspects of the COM interface in general. In the second part, scheduled for next Friday, April 11th, we will have a closer look on some specific functions of the COM interface. So our agenda for today, I will give an introduction, and afterwards we will regard two different approaches for controlling Visum from external processes. And afterwards we will then consider different options for using scripts within the Visum software. And finally we will take a brief look on the functionality accessible through the COM interface, which will of course be covered in more detail than in the second webinar following next week. So what can you do with scripting and COM in Visum in general? All the scripting functionalities in Visum are based on the common COM AP application programming interface, or COM AP. You can use this API for automating Visum from external processes. You can create custom procedures for the usage in Visum's procedure sequence. You can create custom script comments available through the Visum menu then. And there are also possibilities to use scripting for controlling scenario computation. And there's also even a small Python console, so you can directly control Visum through commands typed into a console interface. For those two later parts, we won't have examples today, but the other ones are all shown today. And also another task involving some of the techniques we will describe in this webinar may be interchanging or exchanging data between Visum and other tools, which frequently also involves writing scripts and using some of the functions we see today. A word about COM, because maybe you're not that familiar with the term. The COM technology used to make Visum functionality accessible to scripts is a base technology of the Windows platform. So this is not specific to Visum, but it has widespread applications in many programs available on the Windows platform. And this technology allows communication between different programs, and it is independent of a specific programming language. So thereby it allows to use a variety of programming languages to script Visum or to be applied in conjunction with Visum. So yeah, let's get a closer look on how things work. And so we will now examine two approaches on how we can control Visum through external programs or external processes. In general, this concept means that the Visum software is not started through the user, but it is launched through another program. This program can, for instance, be an application written in a programming language, in a COM-enabled programming language. It can be a Python script, or for instance, it can be a script running inside Microsoft Excel written in Visual Basic for applications. And in this scenario, the controlling process is responsible for launching Visum, for starting the software, for loading all required data into this Visum instance, and then for initiating the required function. And usually this Visum session is then terminated when the work is done, so there's no user interaction with Visum at all. It's all happening through the controlling process. And of course, this approach is useful for integrating Visum with business processes. For instance, if there's different tools involved for creating a larger model, and Visum is used for the automated analysis of model variants. And this approach is also very useful during the development of scripts, because this allows the debugging of the scripts, stepping through the scripts and examining what's really happening. And in this case, the controlling process is usually a script running in a software development tool. We will see that later. Okay, I think it's time for our first example, and we will have a look in running and controlling Visum from a Visual Basic for Application script written in Microsoft Excel. So I switch over to Excel. I've got a small spreadsheet, and everything I've got in here is just a path to a version file in one of the cells. What I need to write scripts in Excel is this tab Developer, which is only in some versions of the software only available after switching the right options. When I've got this, I can, for instance, insert a button here and then write some code which is going to be executed once the button is pressed. In order to make use of Visum now, I've got to do another thing. This is, I'm adding a reference to a library providing access to Visum. I have to choose this from a list, from a fairly long list. There it is. There you see different libraries called PTV Visum Object Library for the different versions of Visum. I choose the library belonging to Visum 13. And actually, by adding this reference, I bind my code to this specific version of Visum, and therefore this approach is also called early binding, in contrast to another approach called late binding, which we will see later. Okay, so what I can do now, I can define a variable, and because I've added this reference, Excel already knows that there's an object available called Visum. Okay, I now enter something. By this line, I tell Excel to start or to launch a new instance of Visum. And I want Visum to load a version file, actually the one referenced in the cell on the spreadsheet. So this should be the actual cell where the value was stored in. And afterwards, as you see here, because I've added this reference to the Visum library, Excel knows everything, every function which is offered through the Visum object. And there is a function available for loading version files, of course, which is called load version. Okay, and I add a small message also, because otherwise the Visum application would immediately close after loading this version file, which is not what we want, of course. We want to see something. I go back to the Excel sheet, and now by pressing this button, if everything works right, Visum should be launched. Okay, actually obviously I've picked the wrong cell, so it's in D3. Okay. Just change this here. This proves that the code is working. Okay, and you see the version file gets loaded, and here's my small message box, and afterwards Excel closes. So you see, through this early binding approach and referencing the Visum library, Excel can give a lot of support during development, because this Visum object gives direct access to all the methods and functions available for Visum. And you can also get a nice overview. There's the object browser available, which allows to browse through all the functions provided in a library, in this case in the Visum.com library. And so you can use this tool to examine what's available in the Visum software. Okay. So now we will do more or less the same thing, but this time we use another approach, which is called late binding, and we use Python as a programming language for doing the thing. So I switched to a development environment for Python. I could write Python scripts just in the text editor and execute them, but in many cases when you develop larger scripts, it's useful to use such a development tool, because it allows to debug through the scripts, to examine variable values and all these things, which is really handy when you're writing scripts. Okay, in order to use com functions in Python, we need to import a library which is called win32.com, which happens in this line. And also this library, again, is not specific to Visum, but it's used in many projects. But because it's so essential to have this library in order to work with Visum, it's automatically installed with the Visum installation when Python support is selected in the installer. Okay, in this approach, Visum is actually started through this line, making use of this library. But different from the early binding approach we saw in Excel, this time we don't really include a reference to a particular library which is related to Visum here. Instead, this win32.com library uses a concept called late binding. So it just knows by this line it creates a COM server of any type. So it knows that my Visum is a COM server, but it actually doesn't really know that it's Visum and what kind of functionality the server offers. So each time we call a function on this COM server later on, this library asks this COM server if it has a function of that name, and when it's available, then it will call it. So it's called late binding because all the looking up of the functions and properties of a COM server happens just when the code is executed. In contrast, in early binding, this happens before. Okay, due to this fact that actually my code now does not really know what this myVisum variable is about, you see this development tool cannot give me that much support as Excel was giving. So when I do the dot here, I don't get this list of available functions. So when using this late binding approach, I have to know a little bit more about the functionality of the my code. I've prepared this here, so by entering this line, it will load the code. And I can set breakpoints into the code, which I'm doing here. But thereby, I tell the PyScripter to stop execution of the script at that point, so I can examine what's happening. Okay, so you see we are now stopping at this point. And can continue, can proceed. And now the version file got loaded. And then we're done. So in principle, it does exactly the same thing as in Excel, but it uses another approach for achieving this. What is nice about this approach is that we can make the script to be completely or more or less independent of a specific version of Visum. When we do it like this, we tell the Python and the Win32com library to start a specific version of Visum, in this case Visum 13, but we can omit the version number, and then it will automatically start the version of Visum being the latest to be registered as a COM server on the system. So when I update my Visum installation to a new release, then usually the script will just continue to run. And you see I've now omitted this 13 here, and my script starts a Visum 14, which is not yet available to you, but of course to me. And you see the script just works as it did before. And this is actually in contrast to the VBA and early binding approach, where I bind my script to a specific version of Visum, and then I really need to update this reference to the newer library and really update my script in order to be able to run it with a newer version of Visum. Okay, yeah, one thing worth to show is in late binding, of course, because you have to know what functions are offered through your COM server, it's essential to have a good reference on this available functionality. And starting with Visum 13, this reference is integrated in the online help. So you have this the Visum COM manual integrated with the online help, and there you can browse through all the objects offered through COM for Visum. For instance, here is the Visum object, and you can see what kinds of methods are offered by this object, and get a documentation about how to call these methods and which parameters are expected, etc., etc. Okay, so comparing these two approaches, early binding and late binding. Early binding is very popular in Visual Basic for applications. Late binding is mostly used in Python. There are actually ways to exchange the two, or to do early binding in Python or to do late binding in VBA as well, but it's not that common. But comparing these, in early binding, you get the benefit of code completion and the object browser, which really facilitates developments. In late binding or in Python, you don't have that. But on the other hand, in early binding, you're mostly bound to a specific version of Visum, while in late binding, you're independent of a Visum release. And comparing the two programming languages a bit, which are both the most prominent ones for the two approaches, in Visual Basic for applications, especially in conjunction with Excel, you got the benefits of Excel mainly. You get the parameter management in the Excel spreadsheets, or the data management, as we just seen. You get a nice user interface designer if you need that. On the other hand, the programming language itself is a bit limited, and it's actually not further developed by Microsoft anymore. And everything gets stored in these Excel files, so in a more or less binary or proprietary file format. And using Python, I would say the programming language itself has really many great features. There are many very useful libraries available, and it's got a large community support. You will find solutions for everything on the web. And as we will see later, the integration with Visum is a bit more tight than it's been with Visual Basic for applications. So some types of scripts will only be can only be realized using Python. But some things are missing, so data management and especially user interface design are a bit more complex than by using Excel. Okay, so for now that's all about controlling Visum from external processes. We will now have a look into really scripting from within Visum. So this approach is in a way the other way around, as we've seen before. So thereby now scripts are launched from within Visum. And thereby, scripting can be used to extend the Visum tools and, for instance, provide custom functionality which is not yet available in Visum, or it can be functionality very specific to a certain project which more or less will never be available in Visum, but it really is needed for your project. And in this scenario, Visum is really started by the user. And also the user loads the required data into Visum. So it really uses Visum in the normal way. But then when he launches a particular script, this script gets access to the current Visum session, and it can apply its functionality to the data currently loaded in Visum. So, and this integration approach, or the ways for running scripts, comes in two flavors. The first, a bit more simple approach, allows just to launch simple scripts from Visum. We will see that in a minute. And there's a more complex form available, which is called the add-in mechanism of Visum, which involves something for management and persistence of parameters for those scripts, and thereby it usually requires also a bit more elaborate development, including development of user interfaces. But we will also see an example for that in a minute. Launching scripts from within Visum is limited to certain scripting languages, such as Python or Visual Basic Script, not to be confused with Visual Basic for applications. And the approach based on or involving add-ins is further limited to Python only. So if you want to write add-ins, then you are stuck with Python. Okay, there's actually an add-in provided with the installation, which is a bit of a workaround to this limitation by allowing you to call a Visual Basic for application script called in Excel spreadsheets as it was, or to appear as if it was a Visum add-in. So for most limitations, there's a way around them. Okay, so in order to prepare a script to be run from inside Visum, it's a good idea to start with a script tailored to control Visum from extern, and then convert it to a form suitable for running from within Visum. Okay. In our example, we want to create a script which simply saves a backup of the currently loaded version file by appending something like date and time to the file name and saving that as a new version. I've prepared the script here. So what's happening here, you know that already from the script we've seen before. So I start Visum and load a version file. Then I do some magic to construct a new file name, which is not of particular interest right now. And then I tell Visum to save this, save the version with this new path. So we can now use the debugger to see what's happening. Oop. That looks better. Okay, so I step through these things, and as we are using a development platform, we can always use the functions available here to see what's inside those variables and to see what a script is doing. The script can export or can print to the Python console down here, so we can write little messages, and we can even type Python commands here if we want to modify variables or to get some more information. So we have a console where we can type Python commands which work in the same context as our running script. So now we tell Visum to save this version, and this should be that one here. So it saved the version by appending the date and the time to the file name. Okay, so if we want to want this type of or this kind of functionality to run from within Visum, we have to do some small modifications to the script. I've prepared that here. The main difference is that when we run a script from inside Visum, we don't have, of course, to care for launching Visum, for starting Visum. Instead, Visum kind of inserts or injects the reference to the running Visum into our script by creating a magic global variable called Visum. It's always called that, which points to the running Visum instance. So we don't need to start Visum because it's running already. We just have to reference it. Another thing, of course, is we don't want to load new data into Visum because we want the function to work on the currently loaded data. So we don't load data, but we get the file name of the currently loaded version file by using this property. Creating the new file name is more or less the same as before, and of course saving the version is also the same as before. But as this script will not run from within Visum, but will not run from PyScripter, but will run from within Visum. We can't use the print functionality, but because we won't see the output, but we write the message to the Visum message window. Okay, so I use this Visum here. Oh, I better use a new one. I open the message window in order to see something later on. And now I can execute the script. Is this run? Okay, and you see this is the output of this line here, and the script has produced the new version file. So you see, we can, on the one hand, execute the script through run script, but if we need that functionality frequently, we can also statically or make it available in Visum for frequent use. So we can create a menu entry and select our script. We can also even apply a shortcut to the script. And then you see it gets, oops. Oh. That's where I expected it. So you see the new menu entry, and I can use the comments I just entered to really run this function. And I get new version files all the time. Besides calling this script from the menu, it's also possible to include it in the procedure sequence. So in the procedure sequence, I can enter or can choose an operation called run script. And here I also select my script suited for internal execution. And when I now run the script, the procedure sequence, this gets executed, and I again get an automatic backup of my version. Okay. So besides this simple execution of scripts as menu comments or as operation, as mentioned before, Visum also provides a more complex mechanism, which is called, or which involves the creation of add-ins. And in this mechanism, we achieve a more seamless integration of custom functionality with the Visum interface or with the Visum data management. As opposed to simple scripts, these add-ins provide a means to separate the manipulation of parameters to those scripts from the actual execution of the code performing calculations. So in order to implement an add-in, you need three things. We need one script providing the user interface for managing parameters. We need another script for doing the actual calculation. And we need a small XML file describing the add-in, which is required for automatically integrating this with the Visum user interface. And also, these add-ins can be integrated either with the script menu or as procedures for the procedure sequence. Okay, so when a user asks Visum to define add-in parameters, for instance, by clicking on the Edit button in the procedure sequence, Visum calls the script responsible for displaying the add-in dialog. Then there the user can enter its parameters or modify pre-existing parameters. When the user presses OK here, those parameters are sent back to Visum, and Visum stores them in the version file or in parameter files, or in case of menu comments, in the script menu. And later, can be days later or whatever, when Visum is started again and the version is loaded again, the procedures are executed again, Visum uses those stored parameters and passes them to the body code, which is responsible for the calculation. And so the calculation can make use of parameters defined days before or whatever. Okay. We are a bit short on time, so we have to rush through this. I've created a very basic add-in. It's really the most basic form you could imagine, I think. So we have those three files. We have the dialog. which will just display or allow me to enter a text. And what this dialog does is, after I've entered a text, it stores the text I've entered into an object called parameter, which is similar to the Visum instance created by Visum, passed into the script, and taken back. So this is created by Visum and managed by Visum again. So this script is only responsible for displaying the user interface. There's another script responsible for doing the work, and this one just takes this parameter value and writes the message to the log file. And there's another file included, which is an XML file, which is required for describing the add-in in order to allow Visum to make use of this add-in. Okay, so if you want to use this add-in, we have to put it in a certain space or place, because with add-ins, Visum is able to automatically identify them and load them. So I need to put this add-in in a specific location, which is where many user-specific parts of the Visum installation sit. So it's in your user directory under Updater, PTV Vision, PTV Visum 13, and then add-ins. And when I store this add-in here, I just put a folder named as the add-in containing these 3 files into that directory, and I start a new Visum. This new add-in will magically appear in the Visum add-in menu. So Visum automatically notices that there's a new add-in available. And I can now use this add-in in the procedure sequence, for instance. Oops. Add-in. I use it here. And if I now press the edit button and everything works fine, Visum displays or calls the dialog script. And I can even create another instance of this add-in. Use another message, and I again open the message view in order to see something. And you see, as the script gets executed, these messages get logged, and if I would interchange those two, the same messages should get logged in the other way around. And I could now even store this sequence, including the add-in parameters, in parameter files or in the version, and they get the parameters, these texts would get reloaded once once I reload the version. Okay. Just a brief comparison. So if you control Visum from extern, you don't have to care for the Visum instance, and you have got easy ways for debugging. When you run scripts from inside of Visum as scripts or add-ins, you don't have to care for the Visum instance, but debugging is a bit more complex than in the other scenario. And of course, for add-ins, you're even limited to Python as a programming language. Okay, so that's what I wanted to show about the different techniques for interacting with scripts and with Visum. I think now it's time to have a look at the COM API itself in order to get an insight or an overview into what you actually can do using this interface. As you can see from this sketch graph, which is still rather incomplete, the COM API gives you access to almost all parts of the Visum functionality. There are some corners which are not accessible through COM, but the most important functionalities, they are accessible. And in general, all COM functionality is accessed through this central Visum object, which we've seen certain times before. And starting from there are kind of hierarchical paths to other objects, for instance, down through the network, through the collection of all links, down to individual links and nodes. Okay, and I think in order to get at least an impression on how these things can work, we take a look at a simple script which does something in the area of accessing net objects and creating net objects. As you can see here, we switch back to control Visum externally, because this is really nicer to use when you're developing scripts. You can use the debugging of the development environment. So this script, as you can see, in this line we retrieve a specific node identified by its node number from the network. So in this variable existing node we get a reference to this node. Here we count the links in the network. Here we retrieve all nodes of the network and then count how long this collection is. Obviously, in these lines we add a new node and then two links connecting this node to the rest of the network. And yeah, then we remove it again and see what Visum thinks about these actions. So if we just execute that and use the debugger to step through this, we see existing nodes is a COM reference. We see that the network now contains 22 links. We can see it contains 9 nodes. We add some new nodes and links. Okay, and we see afterwards we've got 26 links. Thereby you can see that a link object in COM is a directed link. So by adding two links, we actually get 4 new link objects in the network, because each direction is an individual link. You see, you might be astonished that the node count has not changed. This is because in that call I retrieved all nodes into a Python collection, and by modifying the network, this collection has not been changed because it's somehow detached from the Visum instance, whereas using this call I always get the actual count. And down here you can see something. You may, if you look at the script carefully, you may have noticed that some of the things we did here would usually, so if these actions would have been performed by a normal user, they would have triggered warnings in the Visum user interface, because an assignment would have been deleted or links will get deleted when this node is removed. But when you execute code through COM, all these warnings are suppressed. So Visum does ignore all warnings. It will just do what you're asking it for. If you're interested in these warnings, then you can use the visum.messages property and examine these messages, which I'm doing here. So this is the first message Visum would have output after adding a new node. It would have deleted the assignment. And then later, when we removed this node again, the user interface would have shown another message informing that also 2 links would have been deleted. But as we are executing this code through COM, none of these messages really appear as a dialog, but they are only available through these properties. Okay, besides the network topology, of course, what's always important in a transportation model or in a Visum model are the attributes stored with the actual objects. And of course, you can access all these attributes and manipulate them also through COM. The access to attributes is done through a very generic mechanism. So the attribute values or the properties of objects such as links and nodes and so on, they are not provided as static properties of the network objects, but they are all accessible through very generic central functions. In this case, it's the function addValue. And then the individual attributes, they're referenced through attribute IDs, which are also used in the network files of Visum and in list layouts and so on. So if you want, in this case, to access the linked name, you don't just read out a property called name, but you use the addValue function and tell it that you're interested in the attribute called name or identified by name. So in this example, we again retrieve a certain link from the network identified by its from node and to node, and then we read out some attribute values, the name, the number from node and to node here, and we construct a new value for the name, and by using the function setAddValue, we tell Visum to set this attribute value on that particular link to this new value. So we see here, oh, this line has already been executed. This link currently has an empty value for the name. We read out some variables and create a new name. So this is how the link should be named afterwards. We set the value and then read it again. And you see, this is what we get. So this value has been changed in the network and is now available within Visum. So all changes to attribute values of network objects really immediately appear in the network. Okay, so actually the list of all available attributes for the network objects is also included in the online help. So for each object, let's see, here for the link object, you get an overview on the object, but there's also a page available just listing all the attributes available for the link. Okay. Okay. So we come to the end of this webinar. In the session on next Friday, we will more closely examine some parts of the COM interface. So we will see some more code involving different topics or different functions which you can access through COM. Meanwhile, you can find some more information, of course, in the COM reference integrated with the online help just shown. There's also a small kind of tutorial available with the examples of Visum. And there's some other files also. You can always look into the add-ins provided with Visum. They are all available as source code, as Python source code. And there are also some examples included in the Visum examples. In general, you can get information on the PTV software from our website, where you can also download a trial version. There's a lot of information contained in the Visum installation. There are examples and tutorials. And of course, there also are training courses. In particular, there will be two training courses about scripting and application programming in end of June at PTV in Karlsruhe. And of course, you're also invited to our user group meetings taking place end of May at the Shaping Transportation Conference in Berlin. And there are also, of course, some webinars upcoming, particularly in the next week. We have got the second part of this webinar about advanced applications of scripting and COM. Oops. Okay, I hope with this webinar we could give some impression on the scripting facilities available in Visum, and if you've got any questions, just enter them through the chat function and stay tuned after this presentation, and I will try to answer them in the following. Thanks for your attention, goodbye, have a nice day, and would be nice to meet you again next week to the second part of this webinar. Bye-bye.